Things are going very bad for the Democrats across the country. They couldn't look worse. People are leaving their, I wouldn't necessarily say their roles, although perhaps they are leaving the Democrat roles, but they are leaving the party to either vote for a Republican or no one at all. Many people came over with RFK, and Donald Trump is steamrolling through the country. It is obvious, it is inescapable. The energy and enthusiasm for Donald Trump, it may well indeed be more than the Democrats can cheat to get by. It may well indeed. And it's looking like that is indeed the case. We are under 30 days now to the election. So what will the Democrats and their co-conspirators, which means who are those people? Well, they are Rhino Republicans. Some of them that you may think were Trump supporters or would otherwise stick with Trump. Who knows the kind of conversations that are being had in many of the back rooms in anticipation of a Donald Trump landslide that cannot be overcome by padding the vote for the Democrats. An entire system in place, which, by the way, is set up a context, an entire system set up so that cheating is possible and impossible to identify and prosecute. So this considered the prosecution of the criminals who are cheating, considered when the rules were put in place, legally and illegally, so that they could get away with the theft. That's why 2020 was able to happen the way it was. In my opinion, I don't know for sure, but in my opinion. So what happens when they get to a victory, an electoral college victory for Donald Trump, and maybe even, probably even, a popular vote victory for Donald Trump, given the enthusiasm in the country? And really, I think it's more than just enthusiasm, like it was for Donald Trump in 2016, enthusiasm for Trump. But there is a lot of fear regarding Kamala and what will take place in the country for people who are on the fence about Trump, for people who don't even like Trump. There's a lot of concern. And when you look even at the anti-white, otherwise Democrat press, when you look at their press, you see this fear coming out. Like, is Kamala really, is anything going to improve? Will things just keep getting worse? Will the wars continue to multiply? Will they continue to lurch toward World War III? So there's a real concern. There may be even a possibility of a popular vote victory. So what will the Democrats do? Do not expect that there will be adults in the room to stay their hands. They've demonstrated that for almost 4 years now, that there are no more adults in the room. Adults in the room is a colloquial way to say white Western norms, and those have almost entirely been white erased. So there is no adult in the room. There is something that could stay their hand, and I'll mention that in a moment. Now, how will the Democrats and their co-conspirators steal the election if their hand is not stayed by that one element that I referenced mildly obliquely, but I referenced nonetheless? January 6th, our bicameral Congress will come together for a joint session. At this joint session, they will read aloud the Electoral College votes, the results. This is largely pro forma. It has been, although certainly through our lifetimes and many lifetimes, generations, although it wasn't entirely just pro forma if you go back, I think, to the early 1800s. I think there were a couple occasions where this sort of thing, if I remember my civics, this sort of thing happened 2 times. So somebody can fact check me on that just in case I'm not right. They come together to read aloud the Electoral College votes and thereby certify the results of the Electoral College. So at this joint session, if, and maybe you remember from 2020, there was a little bit of a civics lesson there. I was on the ground, I was there. If a member of the House and a member of the Senate object to the Electoral College votes from a state, and they do so in writing, then the joint session is suspended. And the House returns to talk to themselves, the Senate to talk to themselves, and they debate whether or not to sustain the objection. Is it legitimate? Is it illegitimate? I don't know if they use the actual word overrule the objection, but maybe they do. Either way, they vote to sustain. Now, there are three possible outcomes. When the House goes back to debate among itself and the Senate to debate among itself, there are three possible outcomes. Only one matters for the scheme here. And that outcome is that both the House and the Senate agree with the objection. And so, in other words, the objection to a state's Electoral College votes is sustained. The House and Senate will then come together for another joint session, and they will begin again to read the results of the Electoral College votes. The Democrats at this time will have looked, and their co-conspirators will have looked at many different options. What states would have to be excluded? What states could be ignored? The process will continue. Objections made. The House will return to its quarters to debate, the Senate to debate. And again, one of three outcomes is all that matters. Sustaining the objection, they then come together again to continue the process. At that point, it's entirely possible that the Democrats could have succeeded in reducing Trump's vote so that Kamala wins. But what is a little bit more likely is that neither Kamala nor Trump have enough to win. At which point, the Senate and the House suspend the session and they hold their own contingent elections. The House for the president and the Senate for the vice president. In the House, it's by state. 26 votes goes to whatever candidate. And in the Senate, 51. And if you have a tie, Kamala gets to vote to break the tie in the Senate for the vice president. And then on January 20, the candidates that the House and the Senate have chosen are sworn in as president, irrespective of the wishes of the population. Now, you might say to yourself, how could they do this? Wouldn't the Republicans, the Democrats have a slim margin in Senate? Republicans have a slim margin in the House. You have, of course, another election coming up that could shift that a little bit more in favor of the Democrats and their co-conspirators. And on what basis? Like, who oversees the House? Like, what is a legitimate objection? The elected representatives decide. So just as Jack Smith can decide that his patchworked, cobbled together, actually what one professor in law said was idiotic the other day. Well, it's been about 2 weeks or so since I've seen it. Said it was idiotic, this chimera of this effort to prosecute President Donald Trump. Just as he is able to decide what that will be, here you have these elected representatives are the ones to decide whether or not their objections are legitimate. And we see across the board that Democrats use language that, such as Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and if he holds office again, he's going, etc. And that will be the basis. That will be the argument, the ethical, the legal argument that they can make, because they're the arbiters who get to decide whether or not it's legitimate. So if there are enough Democrats and co-conspirators to decide that a state's electoral college votes have to be excluded so that Donald Trump, a state or states, so that Donald Trump doesn't win, because if he does, he'll be a tyrant and the democracy will be over, then that's the only argument they need to make to themselves. So we were talking at the very beginning of this. Will there be enough votes? Will it be too big to rig at the ballot box? That same logic applies to what I'm talking about, because if they have to exclude, 6, 8 states in order to get to a contingent elections in the House, one in the House and one in the Senate, that's going to be harder to pull off. That's going to be harder, and that's going to negatively affect more Democrats in office than a state or two that would have to be excluded. So do not for a moment think there are going to be adults in the room and they're going to say, you can't disenfranchise this entire Pennsylvania. You can't disenfranchise this entire Texas. You can't do that. And then have Democrats and co-conspirators say, well, you know what? You're right. We're just going to go ahead and let it happen because it's not the moral or ethical thing to do. Because they absolutely will do it. They absolutely will. They have lied and cheated this entire time. What's the one thing I mentioned at the beginning that they might not, that might stay their hand, that might prevent them from moving forward? If they have to disenfranchise too many states as well, maybe just one state, this could be an issue. But certainly 2, 3, 4, 5 states in order to have a Kamala victory. Economically, big money holders could be grievously impacted by that, because faith in the US dollar will diminish massively if the Democrats do that. Now, would that mean that the US dollar is going to fall and some other currency or bundle of currencies is going to replace it? No, but it will mean, as the faith in and the confidence in the US dollar, because the United States now looks like a banana republic with the Democrats literally stealing the election at a moment when it's supposed to be pro forma and they're just supposed to give a check off to the results of the states. What it means then is the United States will have to kill a lot more people to ensure confidence in the US dollar. It means that there would have to be more wars, a lot more, perhaps, not necessarily with the biggest of countries, but it means that hostility will have to increase for the United States around the world to maintain confidence. This is a nice word they use, a euphemism, which means that the United States dollar is backed by you dying if you don't use it. That's how it works. That's the reality. So it may be that as bad as the anti-whites who call themselves Democrats or who call themselves Republicans and would be co-conspirators in this scheme, even though they desperately want the anti-white outcome of not allowing Trump to take office, even though Trump is not going to be white positive. He's just not going to be anti-white enough, even though they desperately want this. The big financial backers that get them into office, that keep them out of office, that give them all of the perquisites and everything else, that hide all the jaded little gross secrets that they have in their closets. It might be that these people step up and say, I've got too much in the game. I'm too vested in the United States dollar to allow you to ruin my net worth, at least in the short term, which is what, of course, would happen to their net worth, at least until the United States killed enough people to restore confidence. And that, my friends, is in 30 days what we have to keep an eye on, just over the Democrats. And we should keep an ear open and an eye open to the arguments for how this would be a nuanced thing for Democrats to do, a legitimate and legal thing for them to do. Because the more they make such arguments in the public, the more likely it is that they are trying to introduce people to what they are about to do. So it won't be such an enormous